Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody tuning in today. Supatease here, and in this video, I want to be going over all of the class changes for patch 8.1 and my expectations for what you should consider, and I will consider, the best classes, the best compositions, so that you can have the best shot at pushing for whatever rankings you're looking to get towards the end of the series, or end of the season on January 22nd. So I'm going to be going through them, every single one of them, and breaking them down and summarizing them along the way, because there is a lot of information. This is basically a completely different game, so if you're tuning in to watch, you definitely want to make sure that you hear basically every second of it, because if you miss one thing, you might miss out on what is going to be the next best thing in the game. So as we start here, I'm looking at the notes from Wowhead. Wowhead is a great resource to get information for World of Warcraft, and I'm going to do my best to add my own critical thoughts on what I think of it, but definitely check out Wowhead if you haven't already. So here we're going to start with the Death Knight, and of course we have to start with the Death Knight because Death Knight is receiving the most amount of insane, crazy buffs I have seen for a spec in a long time. Like, you think the Lich King is a king? Well, every Death Knight is now the Lich King, because these changes are pretty crazy. We're going to skim through Blood. I didn't see anything that really stood out. Some nerfs for Mythic Plus, but nothing really relevant that's going to make Blood Death Knight that great in PvP specifically. Then we take a look at the PvP talent changes. So what they've done here is they've tried to make Dark Simulacron a bit easier to use by removing the cost, which is unfortunate for Death Knights because they are so limited on their talent selection. There's a lot of talents in their honor talent section that they have to take for throughput or defensive reasons. And to take Dark Simulacron, which is a bit of an outplay spell, it's not worth the risk of losing something that's guaranteed throughput. So even with this change to Dark Simulacron, I'm not sure entirely if we are going to see its return. We saw some of the auras redistributed. So Heartstop aura is specifically a Frost Death Knight ability, and Frost Death Knight's niche moving into this next patch is much more about cooldown reduction and making the opponent's abilities have longer cooldowns, whereas Decomposition aura went with Unholy, and it's much more focused on rot pressure, and that fits in with the class fantasy, and it also gives each spec its own identity in a way that I think is correct and accurate for each of those specializations. I do expect that both Frost and Unholy will end up being very powerful moving into the next patch, which is basically tomorrow if I'm not mistaken. So all these class changes will be going live, and you'll be able to jump in right away, and you should be feeling very good if you are a Death Knight. We saw some PvP talents added to Frost Death Knight so they can have access to area of effect stuns. They buffed Heartstop aura and moved it only to Frost, as I said. And they buffed Chill Streak again. And when Chill Streak was strong in Legion, Chill Streak annihilated people. So they've doubled the damage of Chill Streak, and quite possibly Frost Death Knight's going to be blowing people up tomorrow on day number 1. And then, as I said, Decomposition aura is going over to Unholy, and Delirium once again with the target's cooldown reduction. So if you're a Frost Death Knight, you're going to be feeling pretty powerful, I believe, into mage teams. And most importantly, from the PvP talents that are coming out, is this little guy right here. We can see it. You might say Lichborn. That's not that great of an ability, Supatease. Lichborn just gets you out of fears. It's not really that great. Well, this is Lichborn on steroids. This is big boy Lichborn, okay? So we all know what Earthen Wall Totem is, or Barkskin, or if you don't, it's a 1-minute cooldown powerful defensive that you can rotate with other 1-minute cooldown powerful defensives to extend a game. And fundamentally, the best classes in the game pivot off of these abilities. So what Death Knight didn't have before is they had Icebound Fortitude, which was a 3-minute cooldown. You can't really rotate a 3-minute cooldown quite effectively. But if you take Lichborn, it will turn Icebound Fortitude into Lichborn, which is a 1-minute cooldown, 30% damage reduction, immunity to a plethora of crowd control effects, with the downside of that you can't move faster than 50% movement speed. But Death Knights already snare people a lot, so you're probably moving the same speed as everyone that you're trying to attack anyway, so that drawback isn't really that big of a deal. It's much more important that you get a 30% defensive cooldown every minute, and you can rotate that with classes like Restoration Shaman's Earthen Wall Totem and Restoration Druid's Iron Barks. Lichborn, single-handedly, is the strongest thing that's being added to Death Knight, which is going to allow it to rise in the ranks as far as Arena is concerned. Then when we move down more specifically towards Unholy, overall, Unholy is losing a little bit of damage, but their damage is already in a great spot. And what you really want to take away from the notes here is that Death Strike is being buffed for Frost and Unholy by a significant amount, with a cost reduction and a 20% healing increase. And this brings me to my second point of what makes something actually strong and powerful in Arena. Well, self-healing or passive healing is extremely powerful in Arena, so when your healer is crowd controlled, you can sustain yourself during those burst windows, and by making Death Strike more accessible with a lower cost and an increased heal, that's doing exactly that. So Death Knight is not only getting a 1 minute cooldown that can rotate with your healer, it is also getting self-sustainability in terms of Death Strike. So overall, Unholy and Frost defensively, they are no longer pillows. They are not pillows. You do not want to be messing with a Death Knight moving into the next patch. And when we look at the PvP talents, there's a lot of information, right? So the important things to take is that Unholy Mutation is being removed and Crypt Fever is being removed, so they're losing quite a bit of damage, and that's what I pointed out. But they bring it back with Necromancer's Bargain by reducing the cooldown of Apocalypse, which is your burst cooldown, and they add Crypt Fever onto it. So against classes with heal over time effects, if you're running that Necromancer's Bargain, you go for some bursty Apocalypse and you add that Crypt Fever dot that does 8% of their maximum health over 4 seconds, and the healing spells cast on this target will refresh the duration of it. It is a pretty necessary ability. So Unholy Death Knights are going to be getting a little bit more bursty, a lot more tanky, losing a tiny bit of sustain. But then when we move down to Necrotic Strike, which is receiving significant buffs, it's bringing Unholy Death Knight to a place it really hasn't been since probably Cataclysm. And Unholy Death Knight in Cataclysm was pretty crazy. So if you are not only an Unholy Death Knight but a Frost Death Knight, you are extremely happy about moving into 8.1. You guys are no longer the underdogs. You guys are now the kings. And on top of the Necrotic Strike as well, to kind of bring into this, is that they are coming out with new PvP specific trinkets. I'm blanking a bit on the names of them, but the effects are much more important. So there is a Necrotic Strike style effect trinket which lets you blast the target and it will absorb a huge amount of healing. Really good when you got Necrotic Strike. You stun lock a healer, you blast a bunch of Necrotic, they come out of the stun and they're just freaking out. They can't top themselves off. And they are also bringing in a defensive trinket similar to Zalzak's Veiled Eye. Now, I think that this trinket is a bit problematic. It's basically a shield that will proc on you at low health, so it will increase your durability overall, and it may be necessary to survive against the Necrotic trinket. Both these trinkets may be a necessity moving into the next patch, so definitely keep your eye out on those trinkets because they're going to be very important moving forward for the rest of the season. And basically, that's it for Death Knight. Frost and Unholy, they're god level status. If we look at the Azerite traits, there are some interesting Azerite traits and I'm curious to see how their synergies work. So Cold-Hearted, as we see here. Icebound Fortitude heals for 2,000 every second and its cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds. So as we know with Lichborn, it replaces Icebound Fortitude. So I can only make the assumption that this Azerite trait will then also affect Lichborn, which means you'll have a 45-second cooldown, 30% damage reduction, immunity to a ton of crowd control effects. Pretty crazy. And it will also heal you for 1,900 times 3 if you can get 3 of this Azerite trait, 6,000 healing per second. On top of your Death Strike healing, on top of the 30% damage reduction. Yeah, we're getting into some pretty crazy levels of power right now for Death Knight. So, and assuming that the new Azerite rings, I don't think they've been confirmed yet, and I don't believe the Azerite rings are available until January 22nd, so I'm not sure if we'll see these. This might be something later down the road. But when we get these Azerite traits, it might be possible to get this Cold-Hearted Azerite trait and a Damage Azerite trait at the same time. So while this trait may not affect you directly when the patch launches, later on into next season, you've got a lot to look forward to. And that also applies to Frost Death Knight. Frost Death Knight also getting Frost Whelp's Indignation. Obviously, anything that revolves around Pillar of Frost is going to be critical to Frost Death Knight, as that's the burst cooldown. That's where all the damage comes from for Frost Death Knight. If you see an Azerite trait that has Pillar of Frost in the name, it's likely that you're going to want to take it together. So Death Knight, they're coming into the patch. They're feeling great. They're on top of the world. Now we move down to Demon Hunter, and I think anyone that plays Demon Hunter may be a bit concerned because Demon Hunter's main meta compositions focus around burning down the mana of the enemy team and surviving through leech effects with I-Beam demonic builds so that they can attack and heal themselves up quite rapidly. While the heal themselves up quite rapidly isn't going anywhere, some of their mana burn effects are changing. But oddly enough, I'm not sure if it's entirely in a negative fashion. Mana Break here is changing quite a bit. It's changing from a very powerful burst spell that you would use on a target with low mana to a quasi mana burn, similar to previous iterations of Skull Bash on Feral Druid. So you will Mana Break a target, you do a significant amount of damage, and any spells they cost, or any spells they cast for the next 10 seconds will cost 30% more. So if you see a healer who's about to dump a lot of healing surges or flash of lights or regrowths, expensive heals, you toss a Mana Break over there, let them cast their heals, they're going to burn a lot more mana. This type of mana burn effect I find a lot more interesting than the next one we're going to move to, because as a healer you can play around this. If you cast your efficient spells, 30% isn't going to do too much to you. But if you cast your inefficient spells, 30% is going to do a lot. I would say that 10-second duration is a little bit high for this. Something around 3 to 5 second range seems a little bit more fair, especially with how much damage it also does on top of this mana burn effect. And now we move to everybody's favorite ability, Mana Rift. This is the ability that was present at BlizzCon and all of the tournaments, and it's basically an underpinning to a strategy to where you can win with crowd control and also win off the clock, running the enemy healer out of mana. It's basically unavoidable. There's very few classes in the game that have mechanics to dodge a Mana Rift, and usually what a Demon Hunter will do is they will pair Fell Eruption into Mana Rift, which will then blow up, burn the health and the mana of the target. Now, they've increased the delay time from 2 seconds to 2.5 seconds, but that is still not long enough for you to be able to do a Fell Eruption into Mana Rift. So basically, nothing has changed other than the range. So a Demon Hunter, who probably doesn't really care about range because they can run around the map really fast, they're just going to be zipping over there, Fell Eruption, Mana Rift, Mana Break. They basically got more mana burn effects in the patch, unless this increase of time means they can't Mana Rift out of their own stun. Demon Hunters are going to be mana burning even more. So if you're a Demon Hunter, you're feeling pretty good about that. You're going to be on top of the world and quite powerful. We saw some changes to the tanking Demon Hunter spec, sort of weakening their power in rated battlegrounds if you're really into that. I'm not going to jump a lot into it. Obviously, we're trying to focus on Arena so we can see what is going to be the craziest, what's the strongest, what are the best compositions, and I'm going to be going over all of that throughout the video. Now we move down to the Azerite traits. And there wasn't really anything that popped out to me as far as Azerite traits for Havoc, other than the Revolving Blades, I believe, was nerfed. So you may be going over onto a different Azerite trait, but then obviously on the next patch, I believe on January 22nd, when they introduce all the new rings, the new rings could be coming out on tomorrow. It's kind of difficult to tell as far as what exactly is being released because the patch is sort of time gated. So maybe be prepared for the Azerite traits to be available tomorrow, but don't expect it, is kind of where I'm sitting at this point. But Demon Hunters didn't get anything that was crazy, especially what I look for this is anything that's focused around I-Beam, anything that's focused around cooldown reduction, these types of Azerite traits, or anything that's focused around cast this spell to increase the damage of this spell by a certain amount. When you see that type of language, there's strong potential that ability could be really crazy strong, and I didn't really see that as far as Azerite traits are concerned. So Demon Hunter, I would say, is staying in about the same power point that it was already in, and that was already a really great spot, and they're getting a little bit more cheeky mana burn effects. That's assuming that you can't Mana Rift out of your own Fell Eruption, but with the change, I still think that you can. So Demon Hunter staying in relatively the same place. You should definitely not be upset. Maybe not overly happy, but you're still really on top of the world as far as Demon Hunters are concerned. Now we move on to Druid. Obviously, I'm a main Druid player, so I'm going to be a little bit biased here. What they've done with Balanced Druid is not too much overall. They've redistributed some of the damage and some of your stat priority. So Mastery is a bit more lucrative now with the scaling increase from 6% to 12%. This means that all of our damage basically is increased with Mastery, and Mastery is more important. Star Surge got a buff in damage, which was, in my opinion, unnecessary. In my point of view, Solar Wrath and Lunar Strike are extremely weak spells, and Star Surge is too powerful, and your damage over time effects are too powerful. But in this case, Balanced Druid is basically just getting more damage. Balanced Druid was already in a strong spot. The only downside really for Balanced Druid that we'll see is the Twin Moons talent getting cut in half, which, to be fair, Balanced Druid Moonfire damage was crazy high, and bringing down the damage of Moonfire makes a lot of sense to me. So bringing down Moonfire and then bringing up their casted spells, which they have done, but I'm not sure if it's done to a degree that is going to be exactly helpful. This is something that I'll be playing through and making guides for you every single day to really figure out the ins and outs so that you can take that information and use it yourself. So what we can expect for Balanced Druid really is just more of the same. We saw a nerf to our Fairy Swarm Disarm. It was already a case where you took this very situationally, maybe in a 1v1 or a world PvP scenario, it was crazy good against a melee with no healer, but in a 3v3 situation, most healers will then look to dispel this nerf. While it is a nerf and it's not really that big of a deal, more attention paid to Moonkin Aura, which is now a much more complicated aura to apply. It doesn't immediately give you 15% crit when you Star Surge anymore, instead giving you 4% and stacking 3 times. So this will change the way you want to use your Star Surges. You may want to cycle them until you can do 2 at once to buff it up to 8% crit. And it's adding actually a lot more gameplay in terms of your Star Surge usage to trying to keep your Moonkin Aura uptime at a high point, but also at a high value of stacks. So they've made Moonkin Aura a lot more interactive. They've increased the casted damage and nerfed the damage of Moonfire. So overall, I'm pretty happy with what they've done with Balanced Druid. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to be enough. Obviously, you can see a buff here to Stellar Flare, but Stellar Flare is too risky of a spell to use in PvP. While they did add a lot of quality of life changes to it by making it free and generate astral power, it's on a school of magic that exists with every other spell. So if you get interrupted on it, you're just sitting there. You can't do much. So because of that risk, it's not worth the reward, and I don't think you will drop it even with Twin Moons being nerfed. Twin Moons just makes you more efficient, and even if it's only 10%, 10% is more than 0% on Moonfire, and we all know how much Balanced Druids love Moonfire. We saw a buff to Deep Roots. They doubled the amount of damage that it can take, and I also believe that they applied it to Mass Entanglement, which might be interesting. I'm going to be testing it out to make sure that it doesn't break immediately. My guess is that you can expect an entangling root that you're attacking to sit for roughly 3 to 4 seconds, which is still quite a bit of time if someone's trying to run away. And if it applies to Mass Entanglement, you roots the entire team and they're all stuck together and you can kind of clump them down and burst them, it may be possible that you take this talent. But if the entangling roots break too fast, then obviously Deep Roots is not going to be something that you take a look for. Now when we move down to Feral, Feral obviously is going to be receiving a lot of changes specifically for Mythic Plus, because Feral is just not in a great spot for Mythic Plus, but that also means it's going to be having side effects in PvP. And what you can really see here is a lot of buffs towards their bleed damage and making their energy regen a lot faster. So Feral Druids are going to potentially go back to a similar style in Cataclysm where they're based around their bleed, so keeping a rake and a rip up on as many targets as possible. And not so much the big bitey nom Feral Druid. While that still may be possible for Feral Druid, the buffs that I've seen make it appear to be much more so the case that we will expect Feral Druid to be a bleed class, and I expect that it will synergize quite effectively with Death Knight. So we're already getting now into some of the composition predictions, and one of the best compositions that I see moving into the patch tomorrow is going to be Holy Paladin and or Mistweaver. I expect these healers to be the best, and I say that because they have the most boom for your buck heals. They just get big, beefy heals out. And I don't know how many other healers are going to deal with Necrotic Strike and all of this constant pressure on multiple targets other than the Paladins and the Mistweavers who bring those beefy heals in. So I would recommend on day one to try Unholy Death Knight, Feral Druid, Mistweaver, and or Holy Paladin. bringing in all of this bleed damage, diseases on multiple targets, necrotic strike stacks, tons of stuns from the Feral Druids, constant defense. And when we move down to the PvP talents, you'll see even more so why I think that this is the case. So Feral Druid is receiving some pretty cool new PvP talents. To my understanding, and it's not listed here, Feral Druid is getting Cyclone back. So it's Kitty time. Kitty's, I believe, is getting Cyclone back as an honor talent. So if you want to go clone crazy, it doesn't say it here, but I believe it says it on the Resto Druid PvP talents that's been added to Feral specialization as well. So Cyclone's returning. King of the Jungle is changing in a way that doesn't make you do more damage, but makes you receive way more healing. And Feral Druids can be a little bit squishy, so getting 15% more healing if you have Rip on 3 people, which is why I think that Feral Druids will also be moving to a bleed build. Keep Rip on 3 people, you get 15% more healing, 15% more movement speed. You can get away, you can get healed up a lot better. And Leader of the Pack is returning, and this used to exist as a passive in previous expansions for Feral Druids, but coming back as an honor talent, which will increase the critical strike of melee and ranged attackers by 5%. Right, you get a little bit of crit, not really the biggest deal, but it's nice. What's really important here is that when you attack and you crit as one of these melee, the Feral Druid included, you heal yourself for 4% of your maximum health. It can occur more than every 6 seconds, but like I said, passive percentage-based healing is almost always very, very good in player versus player arena. So bringing in this Leader of the Pack with your Death Knight who's bringing in those beefy death strikes, bringing in that King of the Jungle with 15% more healing, you are going to be a beefy little kitty meatball rolling around everybody, just dropping them. So to my expectation is that that composition will be very powerful on day number 1 and deals with what I expect the meta will be. And I'll get into what the meta is a little deeper when we get into more of the specializations, because I am going through all of the specializations for the patch tomorrow. Savage Momentum is receiving some changes. It's basically not an immediate damage buff. A lot of the honor talents changes to me appear to be reducing the amount of potential burst of Feral Druid, which makes sense. Feral Druids bring a lot of burst, and now they're beefing up some of their mobility and some of their tankiness and giving them more utility, which I think a lot of Feral Druids are going to be happy for. Obviously, that's my opinion, but after talking to Bean, who plays Feral Druid a lot, I would bet he's more than ecstatic Cyclone is coming back and trade off some damage to get that and some more defense. But now instead, when you land a Skull Bash, it will reduce the cooldown of your survival instincts and your Stampeding Roar, which is basically your sprint, makes you run really fast, and it can make your teammates run really fast. So landing kicks is now not only important for reducing the cooldown of your burst, but also potentially reducing the cooldown of your defense and your mobility. So making sure that you land Skull Bashes was already important. Now it's even more so. So they added a bit more gameplay to Feral Druid as well. So overall, if you're a Feral Druid, you might be a bit upset about the Earthen Grasp change. So now your root has a cooldown, but it's still undispellable and it's still very strong, even without a cooldown. And all these other honor talents are adding more gameplay, making you tankier, and you're getting Cyclone back. So, I mean, come on, you're going to pick the Entangling Root talent, or you're going to pick the Cyclone talent. You're probably going to pick the Cyclone talent. So, I think Feral Druids are very happy about this. I would put them top of the crop, and really I've moved through a lot of specs, and basically almost all of them have been at top of the crop. There's, I don't think, a lot of specializations that aren't. So when we move down here, we're looking at Guardian, and again, maybe just paying attention to it to make sure there's nothing in there that might be a little bit cheesy that we could take advantage of here and have Guardian be really strong. I don't see anything specifically standing out to me on this list, so I do not expect that Guardian Druid will be in a position where it's rank 1 on the ladder and you're cheesing people down as a bear. Now, it may be viable to play, but I don't expect it to be incredibly powerful. When we move down to Restoration Druid, and a lot of people have been asking me about this specialization because I've played Resto Druid for a very long time. And when I looked at it, first of all, yesterday, I was very disappointed. I was extremely concerned. And then I checked out a couple videos about it to make sure that certain things weren't typos. And I was left in a position where I wasn't actually sure where to expect the spec to land. So Tranquility was receiving nerfs for raids, but then it says its healing is increased by 100% when not in a raid. So this is where some of the reading for me was a bit concerned, because when you join an arena, I'm not sure if you're considered in a raid group. If you're considered in a raid group, then Tranquility got nerfed. If you're not in a raid group, then Tranquility got significantly buffed and it needed it, and Tranquility could be a very cool, powerful spell and a nice counter to damage over time, a nice counter to line of sight, so you can duck around corners, go for a Tranquility to pick your team back up if it got this 100% buff in arena, which I'm hoping it did. I think that was the expectation, so I can't imagine that it wasn't, but if it wasn't, then we're feeling bad about the changes. Wild Growth got a bit of a slight buff. Wild Growth is kind of expensive and you can't really use it that much, so a buff to it isn't really going to be doing too much. They changed Early Spring, and you can apply Life Bloom to all targets hit, but you need to be hitting... It's really, again, not worth it because Wild Growth is super expensive. I think maybe in some battlegrounds you can have a lot of fun with this and getting a lot of life blooms on a ton of people and doing a bunch of AoE healing and really topping the meter in a battleground. But in an arena, maybe if you're doing a rushdown strategy against a dot team, so something like a Warlock and a Shadow Priest. Oh, I said Warlock. Well, when we get down there, we might actually see them. So this could be something to take into account. If you're playing with a Warrior or an Enhancement Shaman and your main goal is rush the other team down and you want to just be as safe as possible, you might take the Early Spring, get a lot of heal over time effects, and be a bit beefier, and you trade off your mana. So you're going to burn your mana a lot faster, but you'll be a lot more durable, maybe long enough to be able to run the other team over. So that could be a strategy that you take it into. And then, yes, here we see the Cyclone. Changed from Restoration to Feral in Restoration. So speaking back to Feral, it does appear to be the case that Feral is getting Cyclone, and I can confirm it here. Deep Roots was changed again, still... Resto Druid has a lot of honor talents, and it's very difficult to even fit this one in. So 400% isn't enough that it actually sits for a long time. Maybe you take it if you're playing with a Warlock and an Elemental Shaman. An Elemental Shaman got a lot of changes as well. We could see the return of that. It's an entirely different meta. A lot of the specializations are crazy when I read these notes and I go through them. So the composition pool could be absolutely insane. Like I said, this almost looks like a different game. Now when we move down to Druid of the Claw, this is where we feel bad, man. We feels bad, man, about this. Druid of the Claw was a great way for you to deal with purges, so you could stay in bear form while a cleave was training you down, purging you, and still reapply those rejuvenations. Druid of the Claw being removed is a very big hit to Restoration Druid overall, and like I said, with Death Knights being strong, we might see some Death Knight Windwalkers running you down, purging you, you don't got no hots, it's going to be difficult, and this was the one talent that let you deal with that, and it's gone. So this is where I was kind of starting to be raising some concerns with where Restoration Druid is actually going to sit in the meta. Now I move down to a new ability. It's an old one, but a new one. It's changed. It's Mark of the Wild. It's an honor talent. And this Mark of the Wild functions a lot differently. It's not like versatility or a little bit of stats. It is a 15% damage reduction to AoE and damage over time spells. But it doesn't apply to Shadow, which I'm not sure if it's a typo deliberately left out or if they felt Shadow wasn't part of the Wild, but they put Arcane, and I don't think that Arcane is really part of the Wild. So it seems a little bit odd, and I wonder if that's actually a typo. It says only Nature, Fire, Frost, and Arcane. However, since it also says Area of Effect spells, a lot of damage that comes from a Frost Mage with Ice Nova, Comet Storm, Frozen Orb, you can reduce the damage of that by 15%. And against Balanced Druids, you'll reduce the damage over time effects of their dots. So, assuming that they also add Shadow to this, which I would hope that they do, because Resto Druid actually struggles a bit with damage over time effects, and where Shadow Priests are going, they're going to be a little bit nutty, so I expect you to see them a lot. And Resto Druids kind of struggle with that stuff right now. Resto Druids struggling a bit in general with low mana, low healing output, and Cyclone being difficult to use and costing a lot of mana. So this ability could maybe allow them to sort of beef up against that. I will say that it does cost quite a significant amount of mana, so 5%. And I believe that it is dispellable, assuming it functions the same as the old Mark of the Wild. So teams' counterplay to this will be removing your Mark of the Wild, and if you reapply it, you might be running yourself out of mana, but it could be a very powerful way to make you tank through the damage over time effects of dot cleaves. Now we move over into Master Shapeshifter, and I, again, don't think it's going to be something you really take, because maybe with a chance to be critically hit by melee attacks reduced by 20%, that's really not a lot, and we don't really care much about crit in PvP, so Master Shapeshifter is unlikely to be taken. You can't normally get away with playing Balance Affinity unless you're playing some very specific wizard comps. Feral Affinity in 2v2. So maybe the Master Shapeshifter for Feral Affinity Resto Druid 2v2, you get a cheeky, get in there with some big ferocious bites or something like that. But Master Shapeshifter for 3v3, I'm not expecting to see it really that much. Now we move to Nourish. They brought Nourish back. It's more like Healing Touch with the name Nourish, and it heals you for quite a bit of spell power. It's basically about the same as a Regrowth at a longer cast, and I believe a little bit less mana cost. and it applies a hot, so it's still kind of the same effect, but it no longer applies to regrowth. And there was I'm not sure if this is a typo. I can only assume that it's a typo. 14% of base mana, or this means 14% of the number of mana, which there's no way that it can cost 14% of your mana, right? Because you wouldn't even be able to cast 10 of them. So I can only assume this is a typo, or it's applying to a different numerical value of your mana, and I would probably err on that side. But still be aware that maybe it is a typo, or maybe it does cost. You could do 10 nourishes and they're really not that strong. So you keep both those in mind, but I will err on the side of it probably being on the cheaper end. I think the main goal with them bringing Nourish back, which again is adding more gameplay to Resto Druid, is so that we lost Healing Touch. So brought Healing Touch, made it a little bit beefier, a little bit better, and now you'll have some more decision making in your heals. So do I need to go for a regrowth? He's taking a lot of damage. You gotta get him topped up right now. Or can I get away with using a Nourish because it's gonna be more efficient, my mana, and apply a hot and save me some mana? So, assuming that Nourish doesn't cost you all of your mana bar, which I don't think it will, it's adding more gameplay to Restoration Druid. So overall, we're seeing a lot more gameplay added to some specializations here, and this is definitely going to be a spell that you likely take in most cases, unless potentially you're expecting to get trained down, which might actually happen a lot. It's Death Knight season, so Death Knight's like running at healers, so maybe you can't run with that. Maybe you got to be running some more beefy stuff. But anyway, Resto Druid it's a really difficult spec for me right now to pin down on whether or not it's going to be strong or weak. With the removal of its Purge protection, it's going to be much weaker to those melee cleave Purge downs, and it's potentially that's going to be the meta, and the damage over time comp, so like the Warlocks and the Shadow Priests, since Mark of the Wild doesn't apply to shadow damage, you're not getting that benefit against those, so you may be weak to what is potentially the strongest things in the game. So it's difficult for me to really pin Resto Druid. I wouldn't expect it to be awful, but I'm not expecting it to be amazing and fantastic. It's probably riding down the middle of the road. Now when we move down here, we can see Enraged Maul actually received quite a big buff, and I'm always paying attention to these percent health. So 8% of the maximum health. That's a lot more damage than something that's just a percent of attack power. Then when we're looking over here, they've changed Sabretooth a bit. So instead of refreshing it, so refreshing your dots with Ferocious Bite has changed a bit now. It's only increasing it, so adding more difficulty to the dot gameplay. But they've also given them some talents that may allow them to apply dots with AoE effects overall for Druid. So Feral is getting a lot more gameplay added to it with Cyclone and going back to the bleed-based build. Resto Druid's adding some gameplay with Nourish. Tranquility getting a buff, so you can now maybe use Tranquility and not die through it, hopefully. But yeah, so Druid overall receiving a lot of stuff. Resto Druid hard to pin down. And this is where I was wondering what this actually meant. So roots the target within 15 yards. The reason that this language is important is that this makes it sound like a Frost Nova. So when a mage uses Frost Nova, the mage stands still and everyone around him gets Nova'd. Mass Entanglement used to be you can root someone really far away and then Solar Beam them. Now if you can't root them really far away and it's a Nova with a root, you got to run on top of the healer, do that, and then Solar Beam. So this could be effectively removing the Mass Entangle Solar Beam combo, unless you're able to stand on top of the healer, which maybe you can if you're tanky enough as Balanced Druid. So this actually could be a significant change. I'm not sure if it was just grammatically changed here, or they actually changed the way the spell functions. It's something that I'm going to test out when the patch comes out, but something you should definitely keep your eye on. When we move down to the Azerite traits, the Arcane Pulsar, so if we look here, this is going to be, I think, the Azerite trait that you want to go to. Anything that has Star Surge in it, because that's all of your significant, I'm killing you damage. It just gives you more Star Surge damage, and your Star Surge gives you Celestial Alignment. I'm assuming that will also be Incarnation if you spec it for 6 seconds. And again, it adds a bit to the gameplay of Balanced Druid, because you need to count your Star Surges. You got to learn how to count to 9. 9's a pretty big number for us Balanced Druids, I know. But if you can count to 9, maybe download a weak aura or an add-on to track it for you, so you know when you're getting to the 9th Star Surge, because you'll want to save your Astral Power to do a Star Surge that will proc Incarn, and then have enough to do another one while it's up, because 6 seconds isn't a lot of time to get enough Astral Power to do one with it. But this could potentially add to the sustained damage of Balanced Druid. It could scare your opponents. They might think you popped your Incarnation, but it was actually the Azerite trait version of it. So this adds a lot of gameplay to the spec. Buffs our most powerful spell, and that's going to be doing a lot for Balanced Druid, most certainly. The rest of the Azerite traits are not really catching my eye, except for Switch Hitter. So, and more specifically, the Swiftman variant. And assuming that they're adding more Azerite rings, you might be able to take Switch Hitter and Arcanic Pulsar, and this may open up you being able to play Restoration Affinity, because if you get 3 Switch Hitters, I'm trying to do some math here, that's a 21,000 absorb roughly on your Swiftmend. That already heals for maybe 20-30k. That's half someone's health bar every 30 seconds. So Switch Hitter with Arcanic Pulsar, I think, is likely to be the combination of Azerite hits you go for, assuming that you can run both of them with some of the ring changes that they've done. And if you can't, it may be a decision whether or not you want to be more defensively focused or more offensively focused, but keep your eye out for that, because 7,000 times 3, that's a pretty big number. Raking Ferocity was one of the best Azerite traits for Feral Druid. It is currently. Now they've changed it. So what are we looking here? Reduces the cooldown of your incarnation. What did I say about cooldown reduction? Keep your eye on it, because usually anything that has to do with cooldowns, especially with the way the game is played right now, is likely to be crazy good. So against Feral Druids, that incarnation is a really scary button. Most healers have to react instantly with a cooldown of a similar time span, so roughly around 2 to 3 minute range. Now, if you can reduce the cooldown of that incarnation, you might get a 15-second window, 20-second window where the healer can't respond on the second one of it, and it's going to be almost a bit of an enrage timer against Feral Druids to kill them before they get to that second incarnation. Otherwise, it might be running you down. You have to be really careful, and you bring in that Death Knight again with the Feral Druid. This could be really crazy for them overall. And then when I'm looking through here, I don't see anything that's really jumping out on the page. Lively Spirit got nerfed more. I'm pretty happy about that. I'm not a big fan of the Lively Spirit build overall. We really just see a lot of Azerite trait nerfs to Balanced Druid, and this may be to compensate for the mastery changes that they received. So potentially Balanced Druid is just staying roughly where it was to begin with. And I'm not seeing anything that's jumping off the page really to me for Restoration Druid. It does seem to be the case that they removed Craggy Bark, so that build I was talking about against Jungle Cleaves and Melee Cleaves and Craggy Bark, that seems to have been eliminated, maybe in preference for Switch Hitter. So we'll have to try and see what happens there. But either way, Feral Druid, God status. Resto Druid, probably top tier, but I'm not too certain. I'm not sold on it. That'll definitely be something that I have to see when the game goes live, but keep your eye on it. Now we're moving down to Hunter. Everyone's favorite class that loves to go face. BM Hunter getting some buffs. We're kind of scared of that. Giant T-Rex is running us down. So Kill Command receiving some buffs. I'm not sure if it's really enough to make them extremely competitive, especially when we really look at Marksman. So you Marksman players are probably feeling bad at start of BFA moving into now. They were just really lackluster. But when you look at the numbers on this, 40%, 20%, extra snare time, more damage, everything getting buffed. Keeping your snare up is a little bit easier. True Shot got changed completely, so it reduces the cooldown of your aim shot rapid fire by 60%, causes your aim shot to cast faster. So you're just full duration Legolas, just going ham on everybody basically in this patch. You're going to be a complete turret. You're just going to sit down and blow people up. Now there are some downsides to a turret, right? It can be a lot of fun to just sit down and knock some arrows into people's heads, but if you can't move and get away, if you can be line of sighted, these are critical weaknesses. So while this looks powerful, you may need to look to play with classes that have a lot of control. And what do I mean by control? I mean the subtlety rogues. I mean the outlaw rogues. Someone who can stun somebody down for you to just start knocking them down. And that leads me into another composition that I think is going to be powerful in this meta. Rogue Hunter Healer. Now, as to what healer, I'm not sure if Disciplined Priests are going to be able to deal with the damage Death Knights are doing. So it might be a Paladin. It might be a Mistweaver even. We're going to have to really wait and see as far as how the healers mash up here. It could be maybe even be a Druid. You might have a stealth attack, right? With a Rogue, a Hunter, and a Druid in stealth. You set up with that camo and a Sniper Shot. And Sniper Shot's crazy when we get down to it. Set up with a camo Sniper Shot, big one-shot from stealth, all-in attack with like a Rogue, Hunter, Druid, and that could be absolutely insane. We really have to wait and see, but Marksman could be countered, like I said, by line of sight or by training it down. But it got a lot of buffs. It's looking like it's going to be in a pretty good spot. They removed the aimed explosive shot for a more traditional one, so it's the dot that explodes and does damage. Just overall, it's getting a lot of damage. I mean, there's really not much else to say. Marksman is just getting buffed. PvP talents. Okay, here we go. Sniper Shot, aka Greater Pyro Shot. If you know what Greater Pyro Blast, and if you don't, I don't know if you've been playing WoW PvP lately. Fire mages run around with Greater Pyro Blast a lot. We got Sniper Shot, which is now the Greater Pyro Shot. 20% of their maximum health. You start with a camo, you go for a sniper shot. That's like the old Mists of Pandaria power shot minus the knockback. You just take somebody out right away, right at the start of the match. That's why I think that marksman rogue, the like stealth attack, the all-in, is going to be good, and it might deal with that beefy DK melee cleave meta that I'm kind of expecting to see. This might function in the middle ground. Overall, it seems like the meta is going to be very varied and quite diverse when you really look at all the changes. So if you're a marksmanship hunter, I think you should be happy, but you may want to focus on the compositions where you have a partner that holds someone in place for you to really go to town. Now we move down to survival. I don't believe that survival is really seeing too many changes, but survival was already in a spot that was very good. Like, I would argue that survival hunter is quite possibly one of the best specs in the game right now, so it's not like it really needed buffs. So survival is just chilling in the same spot, similar to how demon hunter is. And now we'll just move down. So BM Hunter, still probably the weakest spec, but it got a little bit of buff. So if you're that BM Hunter main, you like doing 2v2 or something, run people down with your pet, you can probably get away with playing some BM Hunter. Marksman, crazy. Survival, stay in the same level of crazy. When we look at Mage, I actually wasn't overly impressed with Mage. Now obviously Fire is already in a great spot. Frost situationally in some comps is in a great spot. Arcane is not in the best spot. And I didn't really see a lot that's going into it that's going to change that very much. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe Zico or Mitch Jones is out there. They're running around having a good time with Arcane. But from what I've seen with Arcane, it's definitely lackluster comparatively to Fire and or Frost. When we look at Fire, it's just receiving a little bit of changes here with Kindling, now reducing the cooldown of your combustion. You can pair that with some honor talents and really reduce the cooldown of your combustion. And they're receiving a Nazarite trait that during combust, they give crit to their team. So maybe you're kind of like this crit buff, maybe get some spicy chicken cleave, you get some balanced Druid fire mages with the Moonkin aura and the combustion, buffing each other's crit a lot and trying to like burn somebody down. Could be cheeky, but generally the Frost specialization is working a lot better with balanced Druid, so you have some snares to hold people down, because Fire and Balance both don't have slows, so you can't really hold people down even though you're melting them. So Frost is generally better. Frost, similarly to Feral Druid, is a bit problematic in Mythic Plus with its snares, so especially Blizzard, the snare Blizzard. So during weeks with Sanguine, when mobs die and they leave puddles on the ground, the mobs that are really slow and can't get out of the puddles, that's kind of problematic because they're going to heal themselves up to full. Why would you want to bring a Frost Mage in that scenario? But again, these will have side effects on PvP. So Blizzard's snare only lasts 3 seconds, down from 15. So instead of getting out of the Blizzard, waddling your little mealy butt trying to get over to somebody for 15 seconds, you're only going to have to wait 3 seconds. And that could potentially have huge ramifications or not matter at all. So you really want to keep your eye on that. Frost Mages may not be as difficult to deal with as melee because their snares have been so radically changed for Mythic Plus. Although I would argue their snares were quite over the top in PvP anyway. But I don't see really any damage buffs, anything that stands out. If anything, there's actually some nerfs to Frost. It's not looking overwhelmingly crazy to me. Frost could end up being in a much weaker position, and with Death Knights being better, especially the Frost Death Knight, bringing in that cooldown reduction with the Heartstop aura and the Delirium, you might be running mages over. This might not be the mage meta, and I would actually argue that maybe Mage Rogue is one of the weakest compositions, which doesn't really happen a lot. Rogue Mage is usually on the top, so this may not be the Rogue Mage meta when I'm going through these patches. Again, that's my opinion. I haven't gotten to play with all these changes. It's very difficult to actually test them, so this is more so when it goes live and maybe what you should expect or what you can prepare for when we're moving in this, and I'm talking about all the best compositions that you might want to keep your eyes on, and we move through all the Azerite traits and all the talent changes and all the class changes. We got some new skins, you know, Frost Mage Water Elemental needs some new looks. You got some new looks, okay? That's who cares about doing a lot of damage? You got to have a cool looking Water Elemental. Now we move down to Monk. And Monk is also one of the specializations receiving quite a lot of changes, especially the Windwalker one. We don't really see anything for Brewmaster that stands out to say whether or not they're going to be kind of cheesy and maybe rank 1 viable in 3v3 for the tank spec, so I'm not really going to dive too much into the Brewmaster changes. When we look at Mistweaver, they have an Azerite trait now that will reduce the cooldown of Life Cocoon, and they buffed Chrysalis that reduces the cooldown of Life Cocoon. So you may run a Life Cocoon build where you'll be able to use it much more often, which is very nice. they basically rearranged a lot of the disarms to equalize them out so they're more similar to each other. I believe they're almost all 6-second duration now, and some of their cooldowns got changed. So in this case, grapple weapon used to be a minute and an 8-second disarm. Instead of a minute, it's now 45. So you can disarm more often, but it's less of a duration. So you really want to hit your timings. You want to hit those avatars. You want to hit the cooldowns from the enemy melee rather than kind of just doing it because it's an extended period of time. Adding a little bit more gameplay to the disarm utility. I think that was overall a great change to all of the disarm effects for all specializations. And it might mean that you want to take grapple weapon a little more often because you can disarm more frequently. Then when we move into Windwalker, oddly enough, with my reading of this and my assessment, it looks like they've reduced their damage a bit, which was a bit strange because I don't think Windwalker damage, at least in PvP, was absurd by any means. But the main thing that we want to look at for Windwalker in terms of what's going to make them impressive is their honor talents. So Alpha Tiger, granting you 30% haste when you use Tiger Palm on a new target. So you want to punch someone, get a haste buff, punch somebody else, get a haste buff, punch somebody else, get a haste buff. I'm not sure if this counts as a new target if you punch someone already once. So let's say you punch the priest in the opener, then you punch the other two people, then you punch the priest again. I don't think that priest is technically a new target. The reason I say that is because honor talents, similar for Feral Druid, they would rake a target, it would have a higher crit chance, and if they raked a new target it would, but if they went back it didn't count as a new target. So if it doesn't count as a new target moving back, I don't think you're going to take it, because that means you only get to proc it 3 times in a game. If that's the case, I don't think you're really going to want to run it. They removed Control the Mist, but they added a much more powerful heal here with Reverse Harm. And what did I say to keep your eye out for, right? Passive self-healing, percentage-based healing, healing that's baked into your damage rotation, right? Well, this is falling into that category. 8% of your health, instant cast, does that healing in damage to people around that target, and gives you some chi. So you're going to be running around with Reverse Harm, doing that a bunch onto everybody on your team, so you got a little more utility as a Windwalker and a little bit of extra damage off the back of it. They changed Touch of Death here with pressure points, and they, I believe, added in the effect that Touch of Death will execute. I don't see it here on this note, but if you Touch of Death someone at 10% health, I believe they just die, which was how Touch of Death functioned originally when it came out. What's important to note here, at least, is that they're giving them Sharpened Blade, I believe. So when you use Touch of Death for a 4-second period of time, so if you're playing with a Death Knight, you want to do some Necrotic Strike timings, use that Touch of Death, mash in some Necrotic Strikes while their healing is reduced, get a giant absorb, healers pulling their hair out. I'd pull my hair out, I'm bald. And it's going to be a really big pressure point. That was a pun. I'm sorry if that wasn't that funny. Ride the Wind is not changing too much other than it's losing the negative side effect, and Ride the Wind obviously going to be a great pick when you're playing with melee classes on your team, basically an auto lock-in. Turbo Fist has changed, so now Fist of Fury does full damage. If multiple people are stacked up and you're running Turbo Fist, you're decimating everybody that's standing in front of your fists. And instead of stunning, you snare them by 90%, but 90% is a lot. You're really not going to be getting out of a Fist of Fury at a 90% slow, but you can do some counterplay by trying to trade a cooldown or something in that scenario. And then Wind Waker, which could be also one of the best, assuming that Windwalkers are going to be playing with a lot of melee classes, which basically, if you get snared, you dispel a snare off yourself and everyone around you. And if you're a DK, you don't like snares. So the monk is just he's gonna help you out with that. He's just gonna dispel you, and you're gonna run around really fast. So maybe we see some Windwalker melee cleaves kind of rise back up in terms of power with the changes that Windwalker is receiving specifically. They buffed their Touch of Karma to make them a little bit more beefy, and removed a couple of honor talents that people generally didn't take that often in Arena. And there's a little bit of gameplay added in there with the way that they've made Touch of Death change and function. So now when we look at the Azerite traits, I'm trying to see if there's anything here that really stands out to me. So the Fury of Zwen Azerite trait, the fact that it's only a 2% chance here, it's not really reliable. While it could maybe be very good, and maybe you want to take one just for that chance that you get it, and maybe this stacks up to 6%, which would be a lot better, but still kind of low. I think instead, for a Windwalker monk, you're going to be taking the Glory of the Dawn, because Rising Sun Kick, 5,000 times 3, 15,000 damage, and gives you 1 chi. Seems to me that's a lot more consistent and a lot better, especially when Windwalker Monk doesn't have that much sustained damage, so this will be allowing you access to it. So it would be my expectation that Glory of the Dawn is that kind of go-to Azerite trait for the Windwalker Monk. Secret Infusion is adding a bit of gameplay to Mistweaver, so when you use Thunder Focus Tea and you probably talent, so you have 2 charges of it, you can then give yourself a bit of a stat. So if you want to give yourself more versatility, you think you're about to get swapped to, maybe you do a Rising Sun Kick to give you that. It's not really enough of a stat that I think it ultimately matters that much. If it was a little bit more of that stat, then your decision making may matter. You want some more haste to pump out an extra heal, or you want some versatility to soak up a hit. And I think you're going to really only be using it for the haste or the versatility, maybe the critical strike because you use Enveloping Mist a lot. This is some nice gameplay to Mistweaver, but I don't think that 80 of a stat is enough to really have to care that much about it. Then we move down to Burst of Life, which originally wasn't that great of an Azerite trait for Mistweaver, and now it's pretty good. Reduces the cooldown of Life Cocoon by 20 seconds. If this stacks 3 times, that's a minute. And then, like I said, they buffed the Honor talent by an extra 15 seconds. So a minute and 15 seconds. I don't expect that this will stack 3 times. It's probably just 20 seconds. But you would want one of them to reduce the cooldown, so you can use your Life Cocoon more frequently. So Mistweaver, because it's bringing in the big power heals, it was more susceptible to crowd control compositions. That's what it was weak against. And my assumption is that mage teams will be much weaker, at least the mage rogue variant, is that Mistweavers are going to be more powerful simply because mages are weaker, not even because they're receiving significant changes. And it's my expectation that Mistweaver will be at the top because of this, more so than anything else. Windwalker is likely to be at the top because it brings high synergy for Death Knight players, and it kind of brings into that meta of the meatball, right? The meatball cleave and just running down people. So both Windwalker and Mistweaver I expect to be in a solid position moving into the patch tomorrow, and you should be pretty happy with those specializations. Now we're jumping down into the Holy Paladins. There was a lot of panic attacks I saw with Holy Paladins. People were freaking out, not sure really what to expect, and that's because the Blessed Hands Honor talent was changing. So you still get 2 bops, you still get 2 freedoms, great, but now you only get 1 sacrifice, and sacrifice was obviously the most powerful of all 3 of those spells, and now you only get 1 charge, which made all the damage the target takes with another Honor talent 100%, so basically you're bubbling them. But it redirected you, so there's a little bit of a downside, but now you can't do that twice. You can only do that once. So it's going to be a lot more difficult for Paladins to kind of recover through a lot of damage on their partners. And some of the trade-off for that, also they removed Pure of Heart, which I think was a great change. I think having that talent in that just kind of passively deleted Assassination Rogue was very unfair, and it really didn't have a lot of thought to it other than, oh, there's an Assassination Rogue, so I take Pure of Heart to delete them. So they took away Pure of Heart and then baked it into Divine Visions, which is, I believe, not Divine Visions, sorry. They baked it into another one of these talents that you currently do, Cleanse the Weak. They baked it into Cleanse the Weak, which was kind of your AoE dispel, and then your Holy Light will now dispel poisons and diseases. So Holy Light is obviously a lot more difficult to use and isn't going to be constantly healing something like Holy Shock, and so you're not going to be able to remove poisons as frequently and counter the Assassination Rogue. Well, now a well-timed Holy Light, maybe behind the pillar when the rogue isn't attacking you, will remove the poison, or when the rogue is running away and can't reapply, you can then remove the poison and recover. It adds a little bit of gameplay against that style, but doesn't completely remove it. The biggest change that we see for Holy Paladin is Divine Favor going from a 45-second cooldown to a 25-second cooldown, and Divine Favor is a huge heal, massive heal, so you're getting twice as many of them basically, and it's at a no mana cost, so you get a little bit of extra mana regen. And this is important because if it's the meatball meta, if it's a bunch of melee cleaves trying to run healers down, you got this powerhouse heal to sit on and boost yourself back up to full HP when you're in a desperate situation. That's a big deal to have Divine Favor on a reduced cooldown. So I think that Holy Paladin, even though they're losing the sacrifice, getting that Aura Mastery protection against all these melee cleaves that are going to be rushing people down, and potentially the Warlocks with the ranged interrupts, I think this is going to be helping them out a lot. Divine Vision is changing to more of a Shadow Resistance Aura effect as well, so you'll be reducing the Shadow damage over time effects. And this is where it was kind of confusing me with the Mark of the Wild PvP talent that they were doing for Druid, because Paladin only does Shadow, but then Druid does everything except Shadow, which made me think they were intentionally doing that for Mark of the Wild, which is going to be unfortunate because I think Shadow is more important for the damage over time. And it reduces it by 15%. So if you're a Shadow Priest and you're fighting against a Holy Paladin, you're not too happy. you're just doing 15% less damage. If you're an Affliction Warlock as well, you're probably not too happy. So Paladins, as they're the Lightbringers, it kind of makes sense that they should be a little bit more potent, but 15% might be a lot, especially because it just exists in the game. So Paladins might be going away from a counter to Rogues to more of a counter against the lock, the ones lurking in the shadows, right? But either way, that's a pretty big deal. They're going to be a lot more powerful against Shadow Priests and Warlocks. When we scroll down, they remove some PP talents that people generally didn't take. They've added some extra gameplay. I think Holy Paladin is going to be looking like it's in a pretty decent spot. We move down to Retribution Paladin, who is receiving a little bit of cheeky changes really in it. Divine Storm is not that powerful of a spell, so anything that says Divine Storm I don't think is going to matter too much. They buffed Greater Blessing of Kings by a little bit, so you're going to be absorbing more, but they nerfed Blessing of Wisdom, so it doesn't heal you, it's only mana. Divine Purpose got a slight nerf, although most Paladins I don't believe are running this. They're running the Execution Sentence. Hammer of Reckoning, they changed some of the levels. Maybe that was to deal with some sort of lower bracket PvP exploits. I'm not entirely sure. It seems a little bit strange, but that's my guess. They removed some of the honor talents that people generally don't take. And they introduced an honor talent that is a little bit absurd, a little bit wacky at the same time, but also potentially good. So when an ally within 40 yards drops below 25% health, you will get Avenging Wrath for 6 seconds. That is pretty good because of an Azerite trait called Avenging Might, which gives you huge mastery during Avenging Wrath. So if you have extra ways to activate Avenging Wrath outside of its own self-ability, that's really strong. So being able to get it for 6 seconds is really nice. And this is where we then get into the wacky part where Redemption can now be cast in combat within the next 20 seconds of someone dying with a 6-second cast time. But you can't bubble into it, because you'd be able to bubble and then res your partner. I mean, you trade your bubble for it, but you're resing your partner. And normally in Arena, you can't resurrect outside of maybe the Resurrection Totem from Shaman, which can be killed before the person dies, whereas this would have no real outplay potential. Now, this might be cheesy in the sense that team kills your partner, and they're like, hey, we killed him, we're so good, and then you cast a res in their face, and you res him. Or maybe you sneak away and you do it, and they just didn't pay attention, but maybe in a battleground you're going to see that happen more often, but in Arena, you would have to be pretty clueless to let this go off. The real benefit here is that you can get Avenging Wrath for 6 seconds, and then Hammer of Reckoning also gives you Avenging Wrath for 6 seconds. And then when we get down to the Azerite traits, you'll see why that actually really matters a lot more. So let's scroll down here. Ret Paladin's looking like it's going to be in a pretty good spot, although I think they should redistribute the damage of Ret Paladin, because right now they are either just clocking you with Avenging Wrath, or they're sitting back as a second healer, not doing too much, twiddling their thumbs, because their damage outside of Avenging Wrath is just so low that I can't even give it a category. But like I said, with their Avenging Wrath, they're just God mode. So I would actually like to see some damage redistribution for Retribution Paladin. But now when we look at the Azerite traits, Zealotry was a bit of a cheesy Azerite trait Holy Paladins were running to recover with Avenging Crusader. It's now removed, so that Avenging Crusader cheese may not be as potent. This has Divine Storm in it, so we're not really that concerned unless this damage is enough that it's going to be great, because what made Divine Storm great in Legion was that it replicated. It had 10 different effects added to it, and it did huge damage. So you were just a Divine Storm cleave machine, but in BFA, you're not really the case. So unless it's a huge number on your Divine Storm, I don't think you're going to be really looking at any of the Azerite traits that buff Divine Storm. When we look at Glimmer of Light here, it's just Holy Shock. You get a little bit of an extra heal or a little bit more damage, not really too potent. Now, spending Holy Power during Avenging Wrath causes you to explode. I think that this could be quite effective because of this right here. So let's do some math, right? Some quick math. We got the Avenging Wrath duration increased by 5 seconds. We go up to their Honor Talents. They've got 2 ways to activate Avenging Wrath for 6 seconds, which I can only assume will be increased by 5 seconds, which means you'll have 11 seconds, which is 22 seconds. Then you've also got your baseline Avenging Wrath, which I believe is 30. If it's not 30, it's 20. So you got close to a minute of Swifty one-shot butterfly wings. That's crazy, especially when they're doing so much damage with their wings already, which is why I say Ret Paladin's probably pretty happy. You playing with some Ret Pally DK, you're gonna be running people down.
my expectation with the meta, to really kind of start diving into it more now that we've gotten through a lot more classes, is that it's going to be the meatball melee running around. It's going to be the dot wizards, a Cataclysm style meta. The composition similar to what we saw in Cataclysm. And it's going to be crazy because we haven't had really a meta like that in quite some time. We haven't had a meta where so many diverse compositions within that range have been viable. So it's very difficult to predict, but maybe some Ret Paladin Death Knight. Maybe some Ret Paladin caster DPS, so maybe like Ret Paladin Shadow Priest or Ret Paladin and Boomkin. I mean, you bring in that Incarnation Burst, you bring in close to a minute Venging Wrath. That's going to be pretty good. I think if you're a Ret Paladin, you're feeling pretty happy. However, I would like to see some changes so that Ret Paladins are doing a little bit more outside their Avenging Wrath and not so much during. And maybe it's excessive to have 52 seconds of Avenging Wrath, Swifty one-shot, Butterfly Wings. It might do that just a little bit. Okay, let's move into Discipline Priest. People were very concerned with Discipline Priest. I was very concerned with Discipline Priest because I was enjoying it a lot. When we see here, we see some buffs, I believe, or potentially nerfs, changes here. It's hard to really understand the math of this. There's a lot of words here, and my biggest understanding of it is that their atonement healing was reduced, and then they tried to counteract it by making Trinity a little bit more lucrative. They obviously added Weakened Soul, so you can no longer Power Word Shield spam, which was a pretty big deal. Obviously here, if you see when you Rapture, you will be able to still Power Word Shield spam, but if you're a priest really relying on that to kind of keep your teams alive, you're not going to be able to rely on it so much, which means you may have to spend more mana using spells like Shadow Mend. Overall, we saw a lot of nerfs to their damage abilities, but then we saw buffs to Trinity, so I think Trinity may then become more baseline, and you're going to have to be much more preemptive with your healing on the Discipline Priest rather than trying to burst heal through the damage. You got to stay ahead of it. You always be gotten to get out your smites, getting out all your damage as soon as possible, and staying ahead of the damage before you get overwhelmed by it and have to spend too much mana to recover through it. So Discipline Priest, it's very difficult to say whether or not it's going to be in a better or a worse spot with the meta that's coming out, with all the dot cleaves, with all the melee cleaves. These are things that Discipline Priest already didn't deal too well with, which is why I think that the Mage Rogue Priest is not going to be doing too hot, which obviously I'm disappointed about because I'm playing a lot of Discipline Priest, but maybe it'll be fine. This is something that I obviously have to play with. We all have to play with to find out, but my expectation is that it's going to be not so good, not so hot. Now we scroll down here, we move to Holy Priest. Now Holy Priest, on the other hand, Holy Priest he's feeling pretty happy. We got Focused Will. If you don't know what Focused Will is, it's 15% damage reduction when you get attacked by a melee times 2, 30% damage reduction. That's a lot of damage reduction. If you're a Holy Priest, some of the weaknesses were just getting run down and not being able to get your heals out. Now you got Focused Will. Now you got some 30% damage reduction. You're feeling pretty great about that, right? And some of its heals obviously then receive some buffs, some quality of life changes, and then more importantly, we get down to this pesky little spell that I'm not entirely sure really what to think of here. We got Greater Heal. Now, let's just take a second and really just let it soak in here. Let that number just let it soak. 65%. Heal someone for 65%. That's a lot of healing. That is a lot of healing on a 3-second cast, though. So you're gonna maybe play with wizards, right? The Ellie Destros, the Balanced Mages. Like Holy Priest, to my expectation, is gonna be the wizard healer, the king of the wizards, and then brings me to the next PvP talent that's being added, Holy Word Concentration. Now it's a pretty long cooldown, and it's basically a team casting circle, to my understanding, which means that as these wizard cleaves, you'll have to run on top of each other. Now, that's counterproductive to run on top of each other, especially against melee cleaves. So while this will grant you Aura Mastery, when you stack up, you're going to be taking a lot more damage. And this can only happen every 45 seconds. I saw a bunch of people freaking out thinking this Aura Mastery is going to be the best thing. It's going to be the new thing since sliced bread. But really, I don't think it's the case that's going to be like that. I think there's a lot of counterplay to the fact that it's limited to a restricted zone and then adds the other team's potential to counterplay. Then we move down to Shadow, and Shadow obviously has been quite problematic at the moment. It's way too durable with the Honor Talent Edge of Insanity, but overall it appears to be that it's just getting buffed in a lot of cases. Damage is going up. Dispersion is getting buffed, so you'll move faster. You'll heal in it right here. We see this. Dispersion heals for 50% of your health, and a cooldown reduction, and it gives you a movement impairing. So dispersion, which is important because Shadow Priest is very weak against enhancement shamans and warriors and these melee cleaves, so buffing dispersion so it can kind of soak up those big hits was a nice change. That's what Shadow Priest needed. And then they obviously reduced the Edge of Insanity's effectiveness. They buffed the crap out of Void Form. Void Form is going to be nice. You're going to be able to jump into that, blast people with some Void Bolts, and really tear in. They remove. You might see this and be panicking. They reduced the physical damage taken by 10%. Don't panic about that. We're going to get down to something that's a lot better than that. So when we scroll down here, it may even be the case that Shadow Priest is more tanky, at least to melee classes, than it was previously, which arguably it needed. So it's going to be a lot more about going into Void Form, a lot more about managing your Insanity. It's going to be a lot similar to Legion in that sense, where you may run Lingering Insanity and trying to get your haste really high and trying to just constantly pump out as much damage as you can. Now we see it changes to Edge of Insanity, 10% nerf. Now that still has potential that it could be taken, but probably unlikely. They removed Pure Shadow, obviously in preference with the changes that they've made to Dispersion, that you will not really need that anymore. And then Psychic Link got changed so that you can use it with Shadow Word Void. I tested that actually just the day before and I noticed it wasn't working. This could actually mean that you could run a Shadow Word Void kind of bursty, almost Destruction Warlock style, kind of Chaos Bolty Shadow Priest. And it's something that I might fiddle around with and try. They added a little bit of utility here so that you can press your utility spells and not worry about your Void Farm running out, which is a big concern for Shadow Priest, is that it's got so much team play, but you can't really use it when you're in Void Farm because then you run out of Insanity. So they try to help you out there with some quality of life PvP talent selections, but I don't think you'll be running it. What we saw up above is that Shadow actually gets Greater Fade, which is Ice Block basically. Shadow Priest gets Ice Block. Dispersion is already now basically Ice Block. You got 2 Ice Blocks. Those pesky little warriors trying to take you down, chop you up, they're not happy about that. So Shadow Priest then here also gets Focused Will, 15%, 8 seconds, stacking up to 2 times. Shadow is not going to be getting run over, I don't think, anytime soon by the melee cleaves, but it is a bit weaker against the wizards. So standing in the middle of the map against the wizards, you're not really going to get away with that so much, but you're probably going to be dealing with the pesky cleavers a lot better. So this is why I think that the Shadow Priest wizard comps could be coming back with a vengeance, and we may see some Cataclysm style compositions, the Warlock Shadow Priest, the Death Knight Shadow Priest, the Balanced Druid Shadow Priest, not so much the Rogue Shadow Priest, but potentially we'll get to it here as we move down. Thought Harvester was removed, and I believe that they changed it, so it's just more vampiric touch damage. And I've been hearing a couple rumors that this 150% damage reduction is going to be actually quite good moving into it. So you might want to keep your eye out on it. This could be a really cheesy one-shot if you already got 3 Thought Harvesters for this new one, so you might want to keep an eye on this. Might be able to do some insane burst. This Leap of Faith, Death Denied, seems like they've added quite a few utility defensive-oriented Azerite traits, which if you've extended the ring and you can pick your throughput and your utility, just means you're adding more gameplay. So this has cooldown reduction on it, meaning that your life grip can refresh faster, and you get a big shield. That could be really nice for all of the specializations of priests that can use Leap of Faith. So Death Denied, definitely an Azerite trait to keep an eye on. Thought Harvester as well. You want to keep your eye on it. Promise of Deliverance could also be just for passive throughput healing on the Holy Priest. Overall, Disciplined Priest we're kind of worried about. It's in a similar boat as Restoration Druid in that sense. I don't think any healer is feeling too safe with how strong Death Knights is and with how strong the damage dealers are, and with the nerfs they're doing to healers. They're instant cast healing and making them focus more on casting, which adds more skill, makes it a lot more difficult. And when everybody might be running you over some meatball melee cleaves and a lot of dots, it could be really difficult. It might be panic time if you're a healer. It's going to be a bit more stressful, but also more rewarding if you're a skilled healer at the same time. Those go in tandem. Overall, Shadow Priest, you are really happy. You're good. You're happy. Holy Priest, you're probably also pretty happy. Disciplined Priest, middle ground worried, similar to Resto Druid. Now I move into Rogue, Assassination. I really don't even need to read much into this because this change right here, Deadly Brew being removed. This means you have to pick between Deadly Poison, which is all your damage, or Wound Poison, which gives you Immortal Strike. You have to pick now, you don't get both. That almost single-handedly deletes the spec from PvP in my mind, and I am very worried about it. Another thing that's concerning is that under the Talents window, I don't know if this is just a typo or something, probably just is, it's under the Talents, and it says that Garrote is a talent. If you got a talent into Garrote, that's not looking too good for Assassination rogues, okay? They nerfed System Shock quite heavily. Assassination doesn't feel too good. This is the first spec that we've got to where it is a complete feels bad man. I think Assassination Rogue may be kind of just fallen to the wayside. No king rules forever. It's gone, I think. And I mean, I'm not personally that upset by it. I think that Outlaw and Subtlety are a lot more fun specializations to play, and to play against them a little bit more interactive and a lot less straightforward. So maybe Assassination is still viable, but I don't think it's going to be that dominating rogue spec that we see so much on the ladder anymore. Outlaw actually received some nerfs, but Outlaw, surprisingly enough, the pesky little pirates, they're quite potent. I would not say by any means that Outlaw is a bad specialization, even with this change to a talent that I'm not sure a lot of Outlaw rogues were even taking. So Outlaw rogues aren't really moving that much, and we also see that Subtlety rogue isn't really moving that much. But if we take those Outlaw rogues and we take those Subtlety rogues and we pair them with what we talked about with Marksmanship Hunter, we're bringing a lot of punch. We're packing a lot of punch, and that might be the compositions that you're looking to run with the pirates. You're going to be ditching your mages, ditch them over there, just throw them off, and then pick up a hunter, pick up a Marksmanship Hunter. Start tossing people down with some bullets. They basically nerfed Shiv, which was really peculiar because I've never in a single time when I was playing Rogue, I was like, wow, Shiv is problematic. It's very odd that they nerfed Shiv. Overall, the changes to Rogue, not too much is happening other than Assassination is deleted. When we start looking at their Azerite traits, nothing personal, so maybe this will allow Assassination Rogues some competitiveness. Anything that has Vendetta or buffing their cooldowns or giving cooldown reduction is definitely going to be very important. Lying in wait here could be a very important heal, so whenever you're running away, if maybe you're looking for a lot of restells, you will then also be healing yourself every second. And like I said, with the Azerite trait rings changing, you might be able to get this and a damage throughput one, so some passive self-healing, although it requires you to not be standing next to any enemies, so it's a little bit restrictive in that sense. You only get the benefit when you're running away or re-stealthing. Blade in the Shadows, reducing the damage here, and also, I believe so, if you can get both, but I don't think you can get both, Knight's Vengeance and First Dance, which will just be making it so that your Shadow Strike is really fast and hits really hard, could be really nice for Salty Rogue. I'm not really expecting to see much change, other than these rogues pairing up with Marksmanship Hunters. Now we move on to Shaman. We've got Elemental first, and basically what you can expect with Elemental is that they distributed their damage a lot more varied across their spells. So instead of just Earth Shock being everything, Lightning Bolt got some damage, Flame Shock got some damage, Mastery Elemental Overload got some damage, everything got some damage, and Earth Shock lost some damage, which is exactly what Elemental Shaman needed. But it isn't even the main reason why I think that it's going to be powerful. We see significant buffs here to Ice Fury, potentially Legion levels for Ice Fury. We may see the return of that. And one of the builds that I was really starting to consider is, I'm trying to find it here, so you may run an increase in your astral power. So we see here, Surge of Power is a talent. And this is kind of the wombo combo one-shot that I'm sort of predicting. It might not work out, but it might. So this is what I'm keeping my eye on. When you Earth Shock, so this adds in some extra gameplay, your Flame Shock will apply to one target. It's nice if you're looking for Flame Shock uptime, reduce the cooldown of your elementals. Frost Shock can root a target, that's definitely some added gameplay, but what you really want to pay attention to is that your Lightning Bolt cast will cause an additional 1 to 3 elemental overloads. They buffed a ton of damage on Lightning Bolt, and it can now overload even more. Then you see the Stormkeeper down here. Your next 2 Lightning Bolts deal more damage and also cause them to be instant cast and trigger elemental overload. So what you're doing here is you get to full Maelstrom, you run in Earth Shock with the Honor talent that lets it stun. You drop down a Lightning Lasso that does % health now, and it's a huge amount. Like I think it's close to 50% of someone's health. You fully channel that lasso. You just chunk 50% of their health down. So you do a Sky Fury. You do a Stormkeeper, Sky Fury, a Lightning Lasso, Earth Shock, Lightning Bolt. Hopefully you proc another Earth Shock, Lightning Bolt. They're probably dead just to the first 2 spells, but if you do all of those spells in conjunction, so Lightning Lasso, Earth Shock, Lightning Bolt, Earth Shock, Lightning Bolt, I don't think anyone's making it out alive at the end of that. Elemental Shaman is going to be pretty nutty from all of the damage redistribution, from some of the gameplay elements that they're adding to it, and because of what they did to Lightning Lasso, which is really confusing when you're looking at the numbers on this. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on, but what I saw on the PTR for Lightning Lasso was absolutely insane. So if you're an Elemental Shaman, you're feels good man right now. Elemental Shaman in a really good spot. Enhancement Shaman was problematic in Mythic Plus, I believe, as well as Elemental is on the weaker side, so it received a lot of damage redistribution, received a lot of changes to its talents. It's really difficult to say how the side effects of this will play in Arena. What's more important to take away from all of these changes for Arena is the Honor talents. So Forked Lightning was a huge amount of your damage. They removed it, baked it into Ride the Lightning, and also changed Ride the Lightning. So basically you never have both at once, which is a big deal because both of these were 15 to 20% of your damage. That's almost half your class on 2 Honor talents. They removed one of them. That's a 30-year class that got removed. That's a big deal you want to pay attention to here with the Honor talents. So Ride the Lightning will benefit you against melee cleaves, and then when you're not fighting against melee cleaves, it will also hurt ranged classes. So Ride the Lightning is basically it was almost always a lock-in anyway, but now it's a guaranteed lock-in. They removed Fork Lightning, so you only get 1 now, and then they removed Static Cling, which made all of your damage on one target increase by 15%. So you removed a third of your spec, and then removed a 15% bonus on everything on your spec. They got some sustain redistribution up here, but this is something that you're gonna have to play with to really figure out if it's gonna be bad or good, because so much just got shifted around all at once, and these Honor talents were pivotal to why Enhancement Shaman was crushing people. So now with Shadow Priest getting beefed up, Enhancement maybe not crushing people so much. It might be the return, the vengeance of the Shadow Priest against all these pesky melee cleaves. Enhancement Shaman, it's up in the air right now. So Assassination and Enhancement, we're kind of worried. Restoration is seeing a lot of changes specifically to its instant cast healing. Chain Heal is receiving a lot of buffs, I can only assume because Resto is maybe struggling in PvE. Maybe we run for a Chain Heal build, which is also always kind of cheesy in Arena, but if it's powerful enough, you may take it. So keep your eye on Chain Heal. That may be the heal that you want to go for. Unleash Life got some changes, which is nice. Unleash Life has a lot of gameplay added into it. What you really need to pay attention to again for Restoration Shaman is the Honor talent. So here, Ancestral Gift is a new Honor talent. You can get Aura Mastery when you use that Spirit Walker's Grace for 5 seconds. You can also talent into reducing the cooldown of Spirit Walker's Grace to 1 minute, down from 2. So you can get a 5-second Aura Mastery every minute. You trade some personal defense, but you may need it. You may need those beefy Healing Surge Aura Mastery casts because Rippling Waters, the auto lock-in Honor talent, is now removed. You no longer get additional charges of Riptide, and if you want to spec into the normal talent to get it, you're going to lose Earth Shield. Your instant healing, it got dumped. Your instant healing got dumped. So you're going to be casting a lot more. When you're fighting against a lot of interrupts, a huge amount of damage is going to add to the skill cap of the spec, but it's also going to make it a lot more difficult. You're not going to rely so much on the Surge and Tide Riptides to pick people up as much as you were before. So Restoration Shaman is left in a place similar to Discipline Priest and Resto Druid, which I'm not sure if it's going to be able to handle the pressure. Now it is getting this really cheeky Honor talent, Cleansing Waters. So your Chain Heal and Healing Rain spells have a 20% chance to increase crit, and when they crit, they dispel harmful magic effects. So you can dispel all dots. So if you're fighting against a Shadow Priest Warlock, you may run Chain Heal, tell your team to stack up, Chain Heal, dispel all the dots. So you may be a counter to Wizards, much more so, but you are much weaker against melee cleaves. This is then assuming that Pack Spirit receives some justified nerfs to your Ghost Wolf healing. If it doesn't, you may be able to deal with the melee cleave simply by running around in Ghost Wolf. If any of you have seen that, Pack Spirit is absolutely insane. But if it's nerfed, Resto Shaman is in a spot where it might be great in the Wizards, but might be getting run down by melee, which is kind of where Resto Shaman used to be. It didn't used to be the counter to the melee, it was the counter to the Wizards. So maybe it's Resto Shaman is just returning kind of back to the place where it always has been. Some quality life here with Earthbind and Cap Totem getting some extra range. Would have liked to see maybe an increase on duration on the stun for Cap Totem. It's a very minor stun, and most of the time it's problematic because it just puts better stuns on diminishing return. Cap Totem is, I think, definitely needs some buffs there in terms of PvP. Now we see Ankh Talisman. Obviously we can't use Reincarnation in Arena, but this extra health. So we can get an extra 7,000 health roughly with this Azerite trait. Could be really good against teams that are going to rush us down or teams that want to look to swap to us as Restoration Shamans. So you might take that. Again, the Azerite trait rings are still up in the air as far as I'm concerned for what you can take and what combinations you can take, but you may want to keep your eye out when you're looking for it for that. This Earthquake change could be quite effective for Elemental Shaman against melee cleaves. So you just drop a bunch of Earthquakes on yourself and dump a bunch of instant cast Chain Lightnings after it. This could be a nice way to kind of deal with that. Those melee cleaves running you down. Keep your eye on Tectonic Thunder, Thundaron's Fury, anything that has Storm Strike on it. Obviously, as an enhancement shaman, you're going to care a lot about. So this is just a little bit of extra damage by summoning in an extra totem for more Wind Fury damage. It's obviously going to be countered if you're kiting, I believe, depending on the range of the totem. Turn the Tide, both the tidal waves increase by 5%. The spells affected by it heal for an additional. So this is going to be your throughput, your base line here for Restoration Shaman. Now that you're no longer relying on Riptide, you're going to need to rely on those healing surges, those healing waves to really power through a lot of the pressure in the game. Ancestral Resonance doesn't apply to the Bloodlust Honor talent, so we don't even need to look at that. Natural Harmony got buffed a bit here, so again, enhanced sustained damage across its other spells is going up. Enhance is in a spot where it's a little bit too difficult to say whether or not it's going to be better or worse or just the same. Keep your eye on that for sure. So Elemental, you're pretty happy. Enhanced Resto, it's kind of up in the air as far as what's going to be really the best here. Now we're moving down to Warlock. Oh my god, we just been waiting to see what they're going to do to buff to Warlocks, right? Those Affliction Warlocks. Well, they're nerfing Unstable Affliction, the Application Dot, and the Dispel, which is very odd because the Dispel effect of Unstable Affliction is so awful. Most healers can get away with dispelling 5 of it and not even care. So this is a very strange change for PvP. I would have liked to seen a lot more increases to Affliction. It comes across as if they're worried that Affliction will be crazy powerful if they touch it too much when I look at changes like this. They did, however, make them a bit beefier by buffing Curse of Weakness to 30% attack power reduction. Obviously, if you can decurse and remove this, it's not going to be a big deal, but it's slightly better. Demon Armor here, more importantly, is the new honor talent, which increases your health and gives you more armor. I believe they also increase the stamina of all Warlocks baseline, so you're getting a lot more health, a bit more armor. Try to make you more beefy against the classes that sort of rush you down. Affliction is already good against Wizards, most certainly. But against the melee classes that can stay on top of them, they're just falling over. They're made out of paper, so this maybe is going to help out a bit. And maybe we see the return of the Shadow Cleave, the Warlock and the Death Knight. If the Warlock can avoid the melee cleaves, Death Knight keeps them snared and the Warlock rots them all down. Like I said, it's very difficult to predict what the meta is going to be. I would say that those are your kind of go-to comps for Affliction, the Shadow Priest, the Death Knights, and you're going to be wanting to stick with those. And the meta is going to be quite varied and quite difficult to predict. Doom now scales with haste. Demonology, it's in an odd spot because it's just so... You can't get off the spells you want to get when you're getting attacked, you're getting stunned, you're getting kicked. You can't do everything you need to do to get that demonic army up and rolling. So even though we see a lot of buffs here to its damage, it's just so difficult to actually pull off in Arena. While you're a little bit more tanky than your Destruction and Affliction brethren with Soul Link, it's really difficult to actually get it off. And I think the one significant weakness of Demonology right now is that Fel Lord is Lull Lord. He doesn't do anything. He's sitting there spinning his big axe, looking all intimidating, not doing a single point of damage. And I don't know what happened to Fel Lord, because Fel Lord used to be the big bang attack of Demonology. That was everything it was about. And if Fel Lord was more viable, then you could maybe get those casted spells while he protects you. You know, the big daddy demon sitting behind you, protecting you while you're getting all your portals going and getting your demons going. So to me, what I would have liked to see for Demonology is a significant buff to Fel Lord on top of some of these quality of life changes so that they can get their damage going a little bit more, because otherwise Demonology, you don't care too much about 5% attack power on Curse of Weakness. So Demonology, you're probably still floating middle of the boat. Maybe you're a bit better, but like I said, I think Fel Lord needs to come back into the fight if you really want to see Demonology return. Backdraft has been changed, so now you can no longer stack up a ton of haste and get really quick Chaos Bolts, so Destruction's not too happy about that. They got some buffs to their Infernal damage, which they were already very powerful, and they received similar changes to Affliction, so they're a bit more beefy against melee classes. Destruction was already in a pretty good spot, in my opinion, here with 8.0, but now 8.1, it's just a little bit more tanky, a little bit more bursty damage, so Destruction is better. And you may see, again, those wizard cleaves, right? The Destruction Fire Mage, the Destruction Shadow Priest, maybe some Destruction Rogue, have someone lock them down for you to go for some cast. But you're not seeing anything overly spectacular here for Destruction. It's more of the same. Here they've added a bit of gameplay to Affliction, so if you refresh your dots when there's only a limited amount of time remaining, you'll get some bonus damage and you get some soul shards. I like that. That's a lot of cool gameplay. You have to really pay attention to your dot timings and try and hit them at critical moments, and you get a pretty nice bonus. So I really hope that Pandemic Invocation ends up being more viable. Now here we have to keep our eye on Inevitable Demise, because Inevitable Demise has been the pivot of Affliction Warlock's viability in Arena basically across the board. They changed it from Corruption to Agony now, so only some specs will be able to decurse it, not every spec, and it only stacks to 50 instead of 100, which means you're not getting to that crazy and killing somebody instantly, right? So Inevitable Demise is, I would say, much weaker. It does more damage, but at a lower stack, so maybe it's more consistent across the board. I'm much more on the side of Affliction feeling like a rot spec, so multiple classes just dying slowly over time. When you got this Inevitable Demise and you're just like big gun blast, it's like you're no longer in Affliction Lock territory. You're moving in Destruction Warlock zone, and you're kind of invading their space. So hopefully with the damage reduction and then potentially damage buffs if Affliction needs it, we'll see it go back into that role of being a multi-target spec. Right now I'm a bit disappointed with Affliction, and really only for the Warlocks I would say is Destruction is probably a little bit happier, being beefier, and it already had some pretty good damage. Now finally here we're moving down to the Warrior Smash. We see some nerfs to Execute, not really a big deal, but we see some buffs to their utility, and oh boy, thank goodness for that, because Warriors, I'm not saying they're simple, but they need a couple more buttons on their bar. So their disarm's going up to a 6-second duration, making that a lot more lucrative of an honor talent, and potentially a good way to shut down all these incoming melee cleaves. Like I said, disarms across the board have been changed to 6 seconds. In this case, it benefits the warrior. Duel is now lasting 8 seconds up from 6. Another case of being great against these melee cleaves that might be running down your healer. Then Master Commander, another utility spell, giving you more health on your rallying cry and a reduced cooldown. Great utility against all this melee cleave meta. We see Sharpened Blade lasting an extra 2 seconds. Great utility against these melee cleaves that might be running down your healer. So Warrior as arms might be the kryptonite here to all these Death Knight melee cleaves coming in and trying to smash people down. If you're an arms warrior with all those utility changes, you're feeling pretty good, I think, moving into this next patch. Then we move down to Fury. Same thing, some extra utility benefits. So the Warriors might be the light in the darkness of this Death Knight meta that's going to be rising to the top. So keep your eye on that. You definitely want to be focusing on the utility. As we move down to the Azerite traits, Crushing Assault is already the kind of go-to for Arms Warrior. It's getting buffed. You doing some beefy slams. You're feeling pretty good about that. They've changed the Bladestorm trait here to make it more movement speed, I believe. So 5% movement speed that stacks 6 times. So you have fast Beyblade. If you want to run that Azerite trait, Gathering Storm, you do some sort of Bladestorm build, maybe reduce cooldown Bladestorm, you just spin it all over the place, having a good time. That might be a go-to to have some fun. I don't know if it'll be as competitive as the Slam trait, Crushing Assault, but it could be a lot of fun to just play around with, especially in a battleground. If you just want to be a Beyblade spinning around everybody, chopping up people, it could be a lot of fun. We see not too much changing in terms of Azerite traits for Fury. It's going to be more of the same, not expecting too much, so just some utility changes. And we got some glyphs here, so when you pop Recklessness, you got some extra weapons. So we've gone through all the classes here for 8.1. If you've managed to make it through this entire journey to see every single specialization, get my kind of opinion and my thoughts on it, moving into 8.1, this is a different expansion, period. This is a different expansion. The meta is going to be very different. I'm not expecting to see the rogue mages so much. I think we're going to see the marksmanship hunters come in here with rogues. We're going to see a ton of melee cleaves. We're going to see Death Knights reigning supreme at the top. We're going to see some damage over time, spell cleaves. I expect Paladins and Mistweavers to be the creme de la creme, with maybe some Holy Priest at the top there. And we're a bit concerned with Discipline Priest and Restoration Druid overall. But I think with all the changes that are coming into the game, that it's going to be so different and such a diverse range of compositions with some added trinkets, which may be gimmicky and problematic. We're going to have to wait and see. But so much is changing, so much is being added into it. A lot of gameplay changes as well, which should make the game more interesting, that I'm very excited for the patch 8.1. And overall, the only specializations that you really got to be upset with, I think, are if you're an assassination rogue. In which case, put your eye patch on, pick up your pistol, get out there and start blasting people, because I think we're going to see the return of the outlaw rogues and the subtlety rogues with your marksmanship hunters and just raiding parties, taking down people. Either way, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I did my best to go through this, give my opinion here of what you should expect for the patch, and I hope you have a lot of fun tomorrow. I'm going to enjoy diving into it and exploring a bunch of different compositions and trying all this goofy stuff out and seeing what I can find, and I will be relaying that information all to you. I'm making videos every single day, and I may be making more than one every single day. I'm really doing my best here with the channel to provide you guys with some critical thinking, some critical information and opinion to try and help you guys achieve your goals in World of Warcraft, specifically PvP in this case, but maybe I'll broaden my horizons a little bit into some Mythic Plus. Who knows what will happen in the future. Either way, thank you very much for tuning into the video. I hope that you enjoyed it and got something out of it, and will consider hitting the notification bell, hitting that subscribe button, hit me with a comment and some of your feedback here, some of your thoughts on the patches, what you think is going to be the craziest thing. If you just want to talk about it with me, I'm always reading the comments, I'm always responding, and I really appreciate the feedback. So thank you once again for tuning into this video, and I'll see you on the next one.